For over a decade, I've been a commercial fisherman, the vastness of the sea my home. 11 years to be exact. I've witnessed the ocean's temper, its fickle moods, and its hidden secrets. Fear? That's not a sensation I feel often after all these years. But the horrors of the last few days, especially the chilling hours that have just ticked by, have seeped into my bones, leaving me questioning the very fabric of my reality, of everything that I've ever known or believed. If you've never been on or even heard of a factory stern trawler, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a floating factory. It's in the name after all. We are equipped with all the tools to fish, process, and freeze the catch. I started out on the deck crew and worked my way up to first mate, second in command, responsible for the 42 souls on board the Northern Horizon. Now, in my 11 years out on the sea, I've seen my share of oddities. Whales dancing in the moonlight, dolphins chasing our wake like children playing tag. But those were the pleasant memories. The sea had a way of showing you beauty one day and terror the next. But mostly, it's the same old thing every day. Nothing special. We would set sail, spend weeks on end hauling in catch, processing, freezing, and then head back to port to offload and do it all over again. This voyage started like any other, with the usual hustle and bustle of preparation. The engines roared to life and we set sail. Then the nets were cast, hoping for a bountiful catch. The first few days were uneventful, with the ship's routine humming along like a well-oiled machine. But the tranquility was short-lived. About 2 days before the storm, things began to feel off. Peculiar things began to happen. I remember standing on deck, the wind blowing through my hair when I first saw them. Lights. At the edge of the horizon, where the ocean kissed the sky. Pinpricks of illumination that would appear and vanish. Not the comforting blink of a distant ship or the steady beam of a lighthouse, but odd, unnatural glows. At first, I thought they were stars, only they weren't stars. They darted and danced, vanishing one moment and reappearing the next. I tried to dismiss the lights, but there was something profoundly wrong about the way that they moved. And as I said, the light itself, it was too bright, and its shade was off, different than the stars in the sky. Then there were the eerie glows beneath the water's surface. Beneath our ship, ghostly luminescences pulsed from the depths, turning the black water into a canvas of eerie blue and green. Bioluminescent creatures, maybe, but they moved oddly, much like the lights in the sky, fast, jerky. At times it almost seemed as if they were watching us, waiting. That was the first weird thing we saw. Then, the night before the storm, everything electronic went haywire. The radio, our link to the outside world, spat out only garbled noises. It would crackle to life with fragments of conversations, voices that didn't seem to be quite human, talking in tones and rhythms that seemed off. Sentences would end abruptly or overlap, creating a cacophony that sent shivers down my spine. This would have been bad enough, but as I was trying to fix the radio's reception, I picked up the satellite phone. For a few seconds, it seemed to be working properly, much to my relief. And then the phone began to emit a high-frequency noise that grew in volume and pitch before the phone began to smoke. It literally burned in my hands. I remember the acrid smell, the way the plastic bubbled and melted, like it was rejecting the very air around it. I carried the burned remnants of the phone over to Captain McDonald. Mac was a grizzled old sailor with tales that could fill volumes. A good man, I had sailed with him for the last 6 years, and I considered him a friend. As I told him about the radio and sat phone, his face, usually an unreadable mask, showed a hint of concern. I handed him the phone. "Never seen anything like this, Jimmy," he said, turning the charred phone over in his hands. "We need to get the radio fixed, especially with the storm coming," I said. We've weathered worse weather," he replied, but his eyes staring out at the horizon betrayed his unease. 11 years at sea had taught me to respect her power, to bow to her whims and furies. But that night, she was more furious than I had ever seen. Inside the bridge, the dim lights and lightning cast dancing shadows on the wet windows. The captain stood at the helm, squinting through the rain-streaked glass, trying to find a path through the surging waves. "It's rougher than the devil's temper, ain't it, Jimmy?" he remarked without looking my way. I nodded, struggling to keep my footing. "Worst that I've seen in a while. Do you think we should turn back? With the radio and the sat phone and all." Mac's face hardened again, his eyes focusing. No, like I said, we've weathered worse. The trawler can take it." As we spoke, the door to the bridge creaked open, and Dennis, our cook, stepped in, holding a tray with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. The rich aroma cut through the salty tang in the air. "I thought that you two could use something warm," he said, handing a mug to each of us. I took a deep gulp, the warmth spreading through my insides. "Thanks, Dennis." Mac took his mug, giving a nod of gratitude. "Good man," he said. As we sipped, my gaze was drawn to the odd lights that we'd been seeing for the past 2 days. They danced in the sky, unlike any aircraft or star that I'd ever seen. Their erratic movements were hypnotic, but also concerning. "You see that, Mac?" I nodded towards the lights. He followed my gaze. "Yep, been watching them. Not the strangest thing I've seen out here, but it's up there." Dennis shivered, wrapping his arms around himself. "If you ask me, it's aliens. What else would be flying around out here in this storm?" I chuckled. "Come on, Dennis, aliens? Really?" But before Dennis could retort, the sky lit up. A massive explosion, bright and fiery, erupted where the lights had been. Burning debris rained down, disappearing into the roiling sea. All of us were stunned into silence. Finally, Mac broke the quiet. "We should report that, boys. It could be an aircraft." I approached the radio and started trying to establish a connection. But once again, all I got was static and the distorted noises and voices from the previous night. Now even more chaotic. "Still getting that static and gibberish," I replied. Mac's face tightened. "And the satellite phone's out." "Yeah, we're cut off," I said, my voice edged with worry. Mac took a deep breath. "We'll figure this out after the storm. For now, we just need to keep the ship steady." Dennis looked between us, his face pale. What if it's aliens?" he asked. Mac's eyes bored into him. "Don't be stupid." Dennis's eyes returned to the storm outside. I looked at the raging sea and the still present lights which now hovered over where the debris had gone down. My gut churned with unease. The rain beat down relentlessly on the windows to the bridge, the wind howling. The angry sea tossed our ship like a toy in the hands of a petulant child. I tried the radio again, but there was no getting through. Mac looked out the window, his eyes squinting against the onslaught of the storm, following the path of the burning debris from earlier. One of the mysterious lights swirled away from the others and skimmed close to the water's surface. "Well, we'll try again when the storm lets up," Mac decided, his voice firm but with a hint of uncertainty. "For now, we need to navigate through this mess," he said. Dennis left the bridge and I took the captain's place at the helm. Then we lapsed into silence, each lost in our thoughts. The storm continuing its relentless assault. The mysterious lights continued their blinking dance. The storm finally died down mid-morning, leaving us with a deceiving calm. I had a brief moment to inspect the ship and everything seemed in order. It was far from the first storm that we had weathered, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. "We should get the nets back out, Jim." Davis, the boatswain, called out to me. There was an urgency in his voice. "Another storm's already headed our way. Nightfall or early morning if we're lucky." I nodded, watching the dark clouds on the far horizon, a stark contrast to the now calm sea. "Yeah, let's fish while we can then," I called. Once we set the nets, I got to my next task, the radio. I clicked it back on, only to be greeted by the eerie static and the occasional unintelligible voices from the last 2 nights. After a few minutes, I gave up trying to find a clear channel and I decided to broadcast in the blind. I sent a message relating our position last night, what we had seen, and that we were having trouble with the radios. After repeating the message a few times, I stopped. Maybe the broadcasts got out, but it seemed doubtful with how aggressive the interference was. At the very least, there was no way to know. I stood there wondering if I should broadcast a few more times when suddenly a frighteningly familiar sound began to cut through the noise. A high, rising whine, like the one that had destroyed the sat phone. I quickly reached to turn off the radio, but I was too slow. The radio exploded into a cloud of smoke and sparks. The captain and the boatswain rushed over from the helm. After a few minutes discussing the situation, the captain ordered me and Davis to try and repair the radio. "We've got to get this fixed. We can't be out here with no way to communicate," the captain said before returning to the helm. Me and Davis got to work on the radio. We tinkered and fiddled with it for what felt like hours. We tried every trick that we knew, but no matter what, the thing refused to work. "Piece of junk," Davis grumbled, wiping the grease off his hands. "Yeah, I don't like not having a way to communicate," I said, frustration evident in my voice. We decided to take a break, heading to the canteen for some of Dennis's hearty soup. As we sat down, the cook himself sauntered over, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "You guys talking about the lights and the big kaboom?" he said, gesturing with the pot of stew that he was stirring. "It's aliens, I tell ya." Davis laughed, a hearty sound that echoed through the room. "Now you just don't start with that nonsense, Dennis. There's a logical explanation for everything. Just wait till we fix the comms." Dennis leaned in, lowering his voice. "But isn't it weird? All the interference on the radio and the sat phone getting destroyed by a sound. You really think that it's all just a coincidence?" I took a spoonful of soup, pondering Dennis's words. "Things break at sea, Dennis. It's inconvenient, unusual, but it happens." I wasn't really convinced, but I felt that we needed to put a stop to the crazy talk about aliens before it spooked the rest of the crew. Davis chimed in. "It's definitely not aliens. Don't start spreading that nonsense around." Before Dennis could retort, the door to the canteen burst open, revealing a frantic deckhand. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear and urgency. "Jimmy, Davis, you need to come up top. The nets they've caught something." Without hesitation, Davis and I pushed ourselves up and rushed out, our unfinished meals forgotten. The biting wind greeted me as I stepped onto the deck. Salt spray whipped my face as waves rocked the ship. But even that bracing sensation couldn't distract from the strange sight before us. The crew grunted and strained against the weight of the enormous object ensnared in our nets. From where I stood, the object bore an uncanny resemblance to the debris that you'd see after a plane crash. Metallic and gleaming, even in the gloomy overcast light. It had the semblance of a twisted aircraft piece, but not quite. There was an odd quality about it, one that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Davis and I walked over to where Captain McDonald stood waiting. "What is it, Captain?" I asked, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. Mac rubbed his grizzled chin, squinting at the debris. "Looks like some sort of aircraft, or maybe a sub-piece. Don't know exactly. But the nets caught it and we can't shake it free. We'll have a better look once it's on deck." Davis had now moved closer, helping guide the winch as the debris slowly began its ascent from the water. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were meddling with something that we shouldn't. "Mac," I said quietly, "are you sure about bringing this aboard?" Mac chuckled, but there wasn't much mirth in it. Jimmy, if this is from a downed plane or a sub or something, people are gonna want to have a look at it. And you know it's company policy to haul in any trash or debris that we bring up. Besides," he glanced at the object, "I'm curious." I frowned, looking at the debris. Curiosity was all well and good, but right now, all I felt was an unsettling sense of foreboding. I just hoped that Mac's curiosity wouldn't cost us more than we bargained for. The winch groaned, metal creaking as the mysterious debris was heaved onto the deck. Water dripped from it, splattering onto the deck and pooling. My boots splashed through the puddles as I moved in closer, the captain beside me. The piece was an oddity. It appeared to be made of some type of metallic alloy that I had never seen before. Half of it resembled the fuselage of an airplane, though it was strangely elongated and cylindrical. The other part, well, it seemed to be some sort of pod. It was about 7 feet tall, 4 feet in diameter. It looked to be perfectly intact, untouched by the salt water or the rough handling. Shiny and seamless. Speculation buzzed among the crew. Whispers and hushed conversations filled the air. "What is that?" one of the deckhands muttered. "Looks like something from a sci-fi movie." Another replied. "Nah, it's from a plane or something," another said. Some of the men began moving towards the pod, their curiosity getting the better of them. But the captain's voice, stern and authoritative, stopped them in their tracks. "All right, get that thing below deck. Down into the hold." A few voices protested. The cook, Dennis, who had come up to see what the commotion was about, frowned, his face a mask of concern. "Are you sure, Captain? We don't know what's inside." The captain's gaze was steely. "I give an order," he snapped. Dennis shot me a worried look, but I could only offer a shrug in response. The boatswain barked at the men, directing them. The crew jumped to do as commanded, hauling the debris towards the hold. Captain McDonald turned to me, his face tinted with worry. "Jimmy," he began, his voice grave in tone. "Get that radio working. We need to report this." I nodded, I'll see what I can do, Mac. But I worked all morning, and I'm not sure that there's anything I can do. Maybe we should just head for port." He clapped a hand on my shoulder, squeezing it briefly. "Just do your best. And quickly. I don't like the feel of this. I'm gonna get us back to fishing before the next storm. And if we can't get the radio working, we'll head back after the storm." I watched him head to the bridge, his steps heavy, his back hunched. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just pulled something onto our ship that we might regret. But orders were orders. I turned and I headed below to grab a few of my tools, my mind focused on the task ahead: fix the radio. But as I descended, the weight of what we had discovered pressed down on me, an unease that was hard to shake. A few minutes later, I found myself hunched over the radio again. My fingers, calloused and rough from years at sea, struggled with the wires and components. The radio was completely dead. It wouldn't even power on. Hours passed, or at least it felt like it. The bridge was suffocating, the air thick with tension and salt. Every now and then, the metallic taste of blood would flood my mouth as I bit the inside of my cheek, willing the radio to come back to life. But no matter how hard I tried, there was nothing. Just silence. In desperation, I moved over to the satellite phone. I was even less comfortable working on it, but I thought that it might not be as badly damaged as I thought. After a few minutes of work, I flipped it on and lifted the receiver to my ear, but there was nothing but a dead line. It was just as unresponsive as the radio. Burned out, charred. I let out a frustrated sigh, wiping the sweat off my brow. I made my way over to Captain McDonald. He stood by the helm, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The vast expanse of the ocean surrounded us. It was always a sight to behold, but the beauty was lost on me that day. All I saw was an endless expanse of deep blue uncertainty. "Mac," I began, clearing my throat. "The radio's completely fried. The sat phone too. Nothing's working." Captain McDonald didn't turn to look at me. His eyes remained fixed on the distant clouds that were gathering ominously on the horizon. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "We'll keep fishing till the storm's on us," he said, his voice rough, almost distant. "After that, we'll head to port. If we're out here without any way to communicate, well, I don't like it. But we need to haul in as much as we can first. The company won't be pleased if we come back too empty-handed." I nodded. I understood, but my gut was twisting with unease. "All right, Mac. We'll prep for the storm then," I said. It was going to be a long night. A few hours later, and the storm outside was a beast. Worse than any that I had faced in my 11 years at sea. Each roll of the ship sent shivers down my spine. Not out of seasickness or fear of the waves, but from a deep-seated unease that had settled over me ever since we'd found that... the thing. The trawler groaned and creaked, battling the waves that threatened to consume us whole. I was beside the captain on the bridge. His face was a mask of concentration. His hands gripping the helm tightly, eyes fixed on the churning sea before us. In all of my many years with him, I had never seen him so visibly rattled. "Are you all right, Captain?" I ventured, trying to keep my voice steady against the howling wind outside. Mac grunted, not taking his eyes off the horizon. "I've been through worse, Jimmy, but something doesn't sit right." "The storm, or...?" I let the question trail off, both of us knowing what I was hinting at. "The thing down in the hold," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the din. "I've seen my share of wreckage, Jimmy, but nothing like that. You were right. We shouldn't have brought it on board." I nodded, uneasy. No, Captain. Like you said, it's just debris. Nothing more. We did what we were supposed to do," I said, trying to reassure him, even though I didn't feel a word that came out of my mouth. Before he could respond, a flicker caught our attention. The lights on the bridge dimmed momentarily before returning to their usual glow. We exchanged a glance. Power fluctuation. Is that normal in a storm like this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mac frowned, reaching for the ship's intercom. "Engine room, this is the bridge. You guys seeing any issues down there?" After a brief pause, the chief engineer's voice crackled through.
"It's all fine here, Captain. Not sure about the flickering. Might be the storm interfering or something. We'll look into it, Captain."
Mac grunted in acknowledgement, his face more lined than ever. "All right, good. Let me know if you find anything or if something changes." He released the button and sighed deeply. "I don't like it, Jimmy. Can't shake this feeling. Dread." I tried to keep my tone light, though my own nerves were fraying. "Come on, Captain. Superstitious now? It's probably just parts from a satellite or something. We'll make port, we'll report it, and that'll be that." The lights flickered again, more pronounced this time, casting eerie shadows across the bridge. Mac's grip on the wheel tightened. "I'm getting us to port as soon as this blasted storm lets up." I nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on me too. Whatever was happening aboard the ship, we were in for a long night. The storm outside was just the beginning. The ship's metal creaked and groaned. Waves battered her sides as if the sea itself wanted to swallow us whole. The relentless rain slammed onto the deck, the noise a deafening tattoo. The storm had us in its grip, and I felt the weight of the waves and wind as I tried to maintain my balance on the bridge. Beside me, Captain McDonald gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity, wrestling against the storm's fury, his face lit by the occasional flash of lightning outside. The shadows dancing across his face gave him a haunted look. The blaring of the intercom broke our concentration. It was Davis. His voice was edged with a hint of panic.
"Captain, you need to get down to the hold. Something's wrong."
Mac's grip tightened on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the thrashing waves ahead. "I can't leave the bridge, Davis. We're in the middle of a terrible storm, you know." Davis's voice cracked with urgency.
It's urgent, Captain. Sir, we need you down here now."
Mac's gaze met mine. "Jimmy, go check it out. Let me know what's happening." I nodded. "Aye, Captain. I'll report back." Pushing off the wall, I made my way to the door, bracing myself against the ship's violent rolls. The usual hum of the ship, the one that I'd grown so accustomed to over the years, was punctuated by a sense of unease. The whole atmosphere aboard the ship felt wrong. I made my way through the narrow corridors, the cold metal underfoot jarring with each step. A distant clang echoed down the hallway and a shiver raced up my spine. As I approached the hold, a dim light filtered through the gaps in the door. Pushing the door open, the cold metallic scent of the hold greeted me first, followed by a scene that seemed to unfold in slow motion, like a series of still frames in a horror movie. At the center of the hold sat the debris. The debris was now illuminated by a pail that emanated from itself. It was surrounded by a group of the crew, their faces pale and eyes wide with horror. The thing that I had described as a pod had been removed from the rest of the debris. Now gone was its seamless surface. It was split down the center, a pale teal light spilling out, coloring everything with an eerie glow. The interior of the pod, I guess that's what it's best described as, was molded in a way that suggested that it had been crafted for something humanoid, though not quite human. The proportions were off, longer in places, shorter in others. Several monitors embedded within blinked with odd symbols that I couldn't decipher. But my attention was quickly diverted from the pod. The floor around it was a macabre tableau. 3 of our crew lay lifeless, torn apart. My stomach twisted at the sight. Davis and Albert, the factory manager, stood a few paces away, their faces ashen. "Davis, what happened?" I whispered, my voice barely above the din of the ship's engine and the storm outside. "We heard screams," he replied, his voice shaky. We rushed down to see this." "It was the boys," he said, motioning to the bodies. They wanted to see what that thing was, what was inside that thing." Staring at the torn bodies, I asked, "What did this? It looks like they were mauled by some beast." Albert looked at me, his usually stern face now filled with uncertainty. "Where would an animal come from? We're in the middle of the sea, Jimmy." Davis cut in, his voice low. "But if this ain't the work of an animal, then what is it?" I knelt by one of the bodies. "Whatever did this," I murmured, "it's still on the ship." The room went silent, with only the hum of the ship and the distant crash of the waves. Whatever had come aboard with that debris, we were now trapped with it, in the middle of the vast, unforgiving ocean, in the middle of a violent storm. I could feel eyes on me, waiting for me to take charge. Turning to Davis, I saw my own uncertainty mirrored in his eyes, but there was also a steely determination there. Without uttering a word, our gaze locked, and a silent understanding passed between us. "We need to secure this place," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Davis, get some men, clean this mess up. Show some respect for the dead." I paused, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. "And we need to find whatever did this." Davis nodded, his jaw clenched. "I'll get on it, Jimmy," he said. I pointed to the trail that led away from the horror scene. "There's a trail. Looks like, I don't know, slime? We need to follow it, but be careful. Arm yourselves." Albert stepped forward, his face pale but also resolute. I'll check on my team in the processing unit. I'll make sure they're safe." "Good, you do that," I replied. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened and what needed to be done next. Taking a deep breath, I said, "I'll inform the captain. He needs to know." With that, I turned and I made my way towards the bridge. Whatever was on the ship, we had to face it, and I wasn't going to let it take any more of my crew. Fear tunneled deeper and deeper into my mind as I made my way back to the bridge. The lights above me flickered intermittently, casting erratic shadows over the narrow metal corridors. Each flicker felt like a taunt, a chilling reminder of the unknown entity that now lurked within the ship. My footsteps echoed in the steel confines, merging with the ship's familiar hum and creaks, sounds that now seemed to harbor something more sinister. The door to the bridge loomed ahead, and as I approached, I felt a jolt of dread. What would I say? How could I convey the horrific scene in the hold? I took a deep breath and I pushed the door open. Captain McDonald didn't turn to look at me. His eyes remained fixed on the rolling storm outside, the vast waves crashing against the ship, each one threatening to pull us under. "Mac," I began, my voice hoarse. It's bad. We got 3 crew members' bodies down there, torn apart. Whatever was in the debris and that pod thing or whatever it was, it looks like it got 'em, and it's out. Escaped." The captain remained silent for a moment, the weight of my words sinking in. Then he finally turned to face me, his blue eyes searching mine for any hint of exaggeration. But all he found was the raw truth. Before he could respond, the bridge's intercom crackled to life. Albert, the factory manager, his voice shaky, said,
Captain, I've done a head count. We're missing one of our guys. He left the canteen. He was headed towards his quarters, but he never made it.
Mac's face paled. "Did you send someone to look for him?" There was a pause, tension palpable even through the static.
Not yet,"
Albert replied, his voice quivering. Another flicker of the lights.
Captain, that thing's still out there."
Mac exhaled deeply. "Keep everyone in the canteen. Lock the doors. Stay put." He turned to me, determination replacing the earlier uncertainty in his eyes. "Jimmy, take the helm. I'm going down there." "But Mac," I began, my protest catching in my throat. I'll go. You can stay at the helm." He raised a hand to silence me. "It's my ship and my crew. I need to see this for myself." I wanted to argue. We needed him on the bridge. He knew better how to steer the ship through a storm than anyone. But as I met his gaze, I realized that it was pointless. Mac had made up his mind. I nodded reluctantly, taking my place at the helm. As the door closed behind him, I was left alone, the vastness of the storm outside my only company. The waves seemed even more menacing now, each one trying to drag us into the inky abyss below. The wind howled like a banshee, and amidst the cacophony, I could have sworn that I heard faint otherworldly screams. Or maybe it was all just my imagination, fueled by the horror unfolding within the very walls of our ship. I gripped the helm tighter, focusing on keeping the ship steady. Whatever nightmare we were now a part of, I had a duty to see it through. Whatever lurked below, I would face it. But for now, I had a ship to steer through the storm. The crew was depending on me. The soft chirp of the intercom jolted me from my focus. The boatswain's familiar voice crackled through, edged with a new tension that sent shivers down my spine.
"Captain."
"He's not here," I replied.
"Where's the captain?"
he asked. "He's below," I replied, my voice sounding very far away to my own ears. "Albert said that someone was missing," I said.
Yeah, we found him,"
the boatswain said, an unmistakable note of dread in his voice. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "Tell me."
"It's just like the others, Jimmy. Torn apart. Some kind of wild animal had a go at him or something."
My mind raced and my fingers tightened around the wheel. "Are you tracking the thing, following it?" The boatswain hesitated.
"We're trying, but we need to arm up. It's fast, Jimmy. Real fast, and it's clearly deadly."
I could hear panic bubbling just below the surface of his words, and I swallowed hard. "Well, the captain's on his way down. He'll know what to do," I said. "We'll get through this." There was a pause, the silence between us filled with only the sounds of the storm and the ship's creaking.
Yeah,
he said. The intercom clicked off, leaving me with the haunting wails of the storm. My gaze darted to every shadow, half expecting the creature to emerge from the dark corners of the bridge. But the idea of leaving the helm in the storm was unthinkable. I had to trust the crew to handle it, but every fiber of my being wanted to go down there and help. Each second felt like an eternity. Every gust of wind, every crash of the waves, a reminder of the dual threat that we faced. One from the raging elements outside, and the other from the unknown terror lurking within our own ship. I tightened my grip on the wheel, set my jaw, and focused on navigating the storm. Minutes dragged on, each one stretching into an eternity. Every so often, the lights flickered, causing shadows to dance eerily over the bridge. I held onto the helm, steering the ship as best I could through the tempest. Suddenly, the door to the bridge burst open. I spun around, every nerve on edge, only to see the captain stumble in. He looked haggard. His usually stoic face was creased with an unmistakable worry. "It's not good, Jimmy," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. I watched as he made his way over to the desk near the radio and began fumbling with a locked box. "What happened, Mac? What's going on?" He paused for a moment. "That thing, whatever it is, it's taken out 4 of our men." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with anguish. "Davis and his search party tracked it down, but it got away, disappeared into one of the vents." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So, what's the plan, Captain?" Mac didn't respond immediately. Instead, he opened the box and took out 2 revolvers. I watched transfixed as he began loading them. "I've told the men to arm up," he said, finally breaking the silence. "I wish I had more of these," he said, looking at the pistols. "Everyone's to stay put in the canteen. Davis and I are gonna lead 2 groups. We're gonna hunt that thing down." He handed me one of the loaded revolvers. I hesitated for a split second before taking it. Shouldn't you keep this? You're the one going out there, after that thing." He shook his head, a determined glint in his eyes. "You need to be armed too, Jimmy, and besides, if it gets us, then you're in charge." I nodded. "Yeah, but you're gonna need it more. Give it to Davis," I said, handing it back. "You should stay here. I'll lead the search," I said. "No, it's my ship," he said. Mac looked at me, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I know you want to help. You're a good sailor, but I need you here, steering the ship through the storm. It won't matter if we get the creature, if we capsize." He then handed me a walkie-talkie. "Here, take this. It's the way we can stay in touch. Let's check in every 15 minutes. I grabbed the walkie-talkie and nodded. "Okay. Be careful out there, Captain." He gave me a firm nod. "Lock the door after me, Jimmy." I watched him leave, the door shutting firmly behind him. I hastily locked it and returned to the helm. The lights flickered again, plunging the bridge into semi-darkness. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I turned my attention back to the helm and focused on the task at hand. Minutes ticked by. Through the storm, from time to time, the lights would appear, weaving through the waves and clouds. With every flicker of the lights, The darkness seemed to close in tighter around the ship, making the walls of the bridge feel claustrophobic. The wind howled, and the waves, they came in monstrous walls of water, crashing hard against the ship. It was like being trapped in a nightmarish dance with the sea. Suddenly, the crackle of the walkie-talkie jarred me from my thoughts. The captain's voice, tinged with stress, broke through.
Jimmy, everything all right up there?
Everything's fine, Mac. What's going on?
I think it's heading your way, Jimmy. We saw the thing in the processing area, chased it, but it managed to get away. Stay sharp.
I gripped the walkie tighter, my throat suddenly dry. Understood, Captain. Despite the rain-laden winds that battered the bridge's windows, an eerie silence settled around me. My heart raced as I strained my ears, half expecting to hear the skittering of grotesque alien fingers against the metal of the ship. Then, through the storm and the waves, I saw it. A hatch near the bow began to distort, bending as if it was made of rubber. It tore open, and from its gaping maw, a figure emerged, its movements unlike anything natural. The ship's unsteady lighting, accompanied by the occasional lightning bolt, painted an unsettling picture. It was humanoid, but not human. Its deep black eyes seemed to stare straight into the abyss, and those eyes now fixed on me. Its spindly fingers reached out towards me, each ending in a translucent nail that shimmered eerily. The creature's pallid blue skin stretched over jutting bones that gave off a faint glow, emphasizing the delicate veins beneath. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, as if it existed between worlds. A dance of horror, I thought, between our world and whatever godforsaken realm this creature had come from. Every instinct told me to run, to hide, but I was transfixed. I was staring into the face of the unknown, and it was staring right back at me. Through the rain-streaked windows, its form illuminated by the chaotic light of the storm. The creature stared back, its deep eyes voids of nothingness. For a fleeting moment, it felt like I was being pulled into a world of incomprehensible horror. Then it began advancing, each step sending shivers down my spine. Panic welled up, making my fingers numb and clumsy as I fumbled with the walkie-talkie, trying to call Mac and the others. But before I could get a word out, the creature hesitated, turning its gaze towards something under the bridge. Something had caught its attention. From the edges of my vision, figures began to emerge. Mac leading the charge, Davis and 10 crew members following closely behind. Mac paused and steadied himself as the ship rolled. He raised his pistol, hands steady despite the chaos of the storm. Davis stopped beside him and mimicked the motion. He had a pistol in one hand and a crowbar in the other. The rest of the search party spread out to either side, makeshift weapons clutched in grim determination. Knives, gaffs, axes, harpoons, every weapon that they could muster. The creature seemed to sense the shift in dynamics. It began to morph, its fingers elongating into deadly talons. And as if that wasn't terrifying enough, tentacles sprang from its back, writhing with malevolent intent. The sight was enough to freeze anyone in their tracks, but not Mac. He took careful aim, but before he could pull the trigger, the creature lunged. The sheer speed was staggering. The world seemed to blur around its movements. It flew towards the captain. Mac's shot rang out, a sharp crack against the backdrop of the storm. He missed. The creature rushed towards him, its wrath palpable. Davis, always bold, lunged forward with another crew member, trying to shield Mac. The crewman swung a length of pipe, aiming for the creature's head, but the creature moved with a predatory grace, evading the pipe and striking back almost simultaneously. With a swipe of its talon, it knocked the crew member aside. The crewman didn't stand a chance. He was thrown back with so much force that he slid across the wet deck like a rag doll. Davis tried to fire off a shot, but one of the creature's tentacle-like appendages shot out, wrapping around his arm, bending it at an unnatural angle. I couldn't hear the sound of cracking bones or Davis's scream over the storm, but still they seemed to play in my mind. Another tentacle lashed out around his leg and hoisted him into the air. I could only watch in horror as he was flung overboard, disappearing into the raging sea. The realization that I would never see my friend again, that he was gone, hit me like a ton of bricks. Enraged, 3 of the crew charged the creature, their faces contorted with anger and fear. They swung with all of their might, knives and improvised weapons glinting in the dim, stormy light. But the alien moved with a sinister grace, again evading all of their slashes and strikes. It retaliated with a brutal efficiency, its talons and tentacles slashing and grabbing. I watched in horror as the creature took them apart one by one. The men were thrown aside, their lifeless bodies discarded like broken toys. The realization that we were outmatched, that this creature was not just an alien but superior, settled into my gut like a block of ice. The captain had been knocked back during the creature's initial attack, but Mac had managed to get back onto his feet. He now knelt, pushing against the weight of the wind and the rain, taking aim again. The alien's features were barely discernible, but its eyes, they were clear, and there was an unmistakable hatred. The creature moved forward, its approach deliberate. It was unfazed by the storm. Its intentions were clear. It moved towards the captain. Mac's finger tightened on the trigger. The distance between them was closing rapidly. The creature lunged, and in that split second, Mac fired. But the shot again went wide, the bullet disappearing into the night. The alien's talons, glistening wet in the rain, reached out and snagged Mac's leg. A strangled cry escaped his lips as he tried to fire again. This time, the shot connected. The creature howled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine, intertwining with the storm's cacophony. With a strength that belied its lithe form, the creature hurled Mac through the air. My heart lurched in my chest as I saw his silhouette soar towards the bridge, illuminated by a bolt of lightning. He crashed into something out of my view, and I heard a sickening thud. The crewmen, their faces masked with terror, rushed towards where Mac had landed. But then their attention, and mine, quickly shifted back to the alien. Despite its injuries, it began to make its way towards the hatch. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it pause. It looked back at where the captain and the crew must be, and then, with a speed that seemed impossible, it vanished back into the hatch. I blinked, trying to process the whirlwind of events that had just happened. The rain continued to hammer down, the storm raged on, and somewhere in the ship, that alien creature lurked. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to do something, but for a moment, all that I could do was stand there, my mind racing, the situation completely blanking my mind. A heavy pounding on the bridge door roused me from my shock. I rushed to the door and unlocked it. The remaining crewmen from the search party, their faces pale and slick with rain, hauled the wounded Captain McDonald into the bridge. The captain's leg was a mangled mess, dark blood oozing through the shredded fabric of his pants. I made a quick dash to the first aid cabinet, yanking it open and grabbing the kit. "Jimmy," Mac rasped, pain clear in his voice but with a firmness that had always been his signature. "We gotta stop that thing. Let me take the helm." I paused, trying to process his words while absorbing the gravity of his injury. "Mac, you're injured. Badly," I said, gesturing towards his leg. His eyes met mine, a steely determination burning within them. "I'll be all right. I can steer the ship. I have to." One of the crewmen, working to tie a makeshift tourniquet around the captain's leg, shot me a doubtful look, silently communicating the severity of the situation. I swallowed hard, struggling with the decision. But looking at the captain's resolute expression, I knew that he wouldn't be swayed. "The tourniquet's on," he grunted, pushing himself upright and gritting his teeth against the pain. As he hobbled to the helm, I felt the weight of the cold pistol he pressed into my hand. The metal seemed to sear into my skin. "Jimmy," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You gotta get out there. We have to find that thing before it's too late." I nodded, gripping the weapon tighter. The storm outside might be fierce, but the real danger was lurking within our own ship, and we were going to have to face it head on. Leaving the bridge, we rushed down the metal-grated corridor, our boots clanging loudly with every step. As we went below, the sound of distant screams echoing from the canteen pulled us forward. As we neared the canteen, the scent of blood assailed our nostrils, and I braced myself for what lay ahead. Pushing open the door, the sight that greeted us was horrific. The bodies of my crewmates lay strewn about the floor, twisted in grotesque positions. One of the crewmen behind me started to vomit. Another, a young guy named Carl, started to sob, the weight of the scene breaking him. "Get a grip," snapped another crewman, his voice sharp with a mix of fear and frustration. I stepped over the body of Eddie, one of our deckhands, trying to keep my composure. The shock of seeing friends, men that I had worked with for years, reduced to such a state was overwhelming. I could feel a tight knot forming in my stomach, and I struggled to keep my emotions in check. A soft whimper from the direction of the kitchen caught my attention. Moving cautiously, I followed the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the dimness. Huddled under the sink, eyes wide with terror, was Dennis. "Dennis," I whispered, crouching down to his level. His gaze met mine, and through tear-filled eyes, he managed to croak out, "Jimmy, it was so fast. We tried to fight it, but it was too fast." I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. "Stay here, Dennis. Stay hidden." He nodded, his body trembling uncontrollably. I could see the raw terror in his eyes, a mirror of what each of us felt deep down. I stood, taking a moment to gather my thoughts. The canteen, which was once filled with laughter and camaraderie, now resembled a butcher's shop. As I looked around, a cold realization dawned on me that unless we found a way to stop it, the canteen might be a grim preview of what awaited us all. There was a sickening silence, punctuated only by the hum of the ship's engine and the distant rumbling of the storm outside. I pulled out the walkie-talkie, its cold plastic a stark contrast to the warm stickiness that stained my hands. "Captain, My voice was a hoarse whisper. "We've got a situation in the canteen. The crew, they didn't stand a chance." There was a brief pause on the other end before Mac's voice, filled with a mix of alarm and disbelief, crackled back.
"What happened?"
It tore through them. Like I said, they didn't stand a chance. My breath was coming faster now, the weight of what I had seen pressing down on me.
"Jimmy."
Mac's voice was filled with terror.
"We have to find that thing. We can't let it."
But his voice was drowned out by the sharp static of the intercom system. The chief engineer's voice came through, tinged with an unmistakable panic.
"Captain, something's at the hatch to the engine room. It's trying to get in. Keep it shut. Don't let it inside."
Mac's voice held a sharp edge of command. There was a heart-stopping moment of silence before the ear-piercing screech of tearing metal echoed through the intercom, followed by a series of screams. They were guttural, filled with terror and pain. I felt a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. "Mac, I'm heading to the engine room."
"No."
His voice was firm.
You stay put, don't."
But his words were cut off as the ship's lights flickered and died, plunging the canteen into darkness. The only illumination came from the dim glow of the emergency lights, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I pulled out my flashlight and I switched it on. The other crewmen followed suit, their own beams dancing nervously over the room. The captain's voice broke through on the radio, filled with urgency.
"Jimmy, get to the engine room now."
I didn't need any more encouragement. My feet pounded against the floor as I raced towards the engine room, the other crewmen close on my heels. The air was thick with tension, every creak of the ship, every distant roar of the storm amplifying our fear. The lights would intermittently flicker, but remained mostly off. The flickers of the overhead bulbs and the beams from our flashlights created a disorientating kaleidoscope of shadows on the walls. Each shadow seemed to dance and writhe as though alive, and every small noise was amplified by the silence. Reaching the engine room, my heart caught in my throat. The hatch lay twisted and mangled as if something immensely strong had torn it away. The thick, suffocating scent of burning wires and oil hung in the air. It was obvious that something had gone terribly wrong. The chief engineer, a man that I had shared countless drinks and stories with over the years, was sprawled near the entrance, his face contorted in a silent scream. I quickly checked his pulse. Nothing. "Fan out, but stay close," I whispered to the crewman, my voice hushed and trembling slightly. "And be quiet, but call out if you see it." The engine room was, of course, filled with machinery, and shadows lurked in every nook and cranny. The sporadic hum of the equipment and the distant roar of the storm outside created an eerie backdrop. From somewhere in the depths of the room came a soft, almost melodic clicking. It was rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock, but it was sharper. I tightened my grip on the pistol, my fingers slick with sweat. Shining my flashlight towards the noise, my beam caught a glimpse of something. Movement, a flicker, a shadow that wasn't just a shadow. Suddenly, a scream echoed from behind a massive engine block, followed by the guttural growl of something not human. We all exchanged terrified glances. "Stay sharp," I whispered, my voice strained with fear. I aimed the pistol, steadying it with my flashlight hand, trying to pierce the inky blackness. My heart raced, each beat echoing loudly in my ears. Suddenly, the chilling shriek of a crewman, echoed through the engine room. From behind me came another scream, more desperate this time, filled with raw terror. I whipped around, flashlight and pistol aimed, just in time to see one of our crewmen being lifted into the air. The thing's spindly, elongated fingers tightening around the man's throat. Without hesitation, another crewman lunged at the creature, a harpoon clutched tightly in his hand. He stabbed upwards at it, the sharp point sinking into the creature's side. But the thing barely flinched. Instead, with a swift, fluid motion, it turned its attention to him, its mouth opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. Before it could strike him, I took my chance. Aiming carefully, I squeezed the trigger. The pistol's report was deafening in the confined space. The creature reeled back, releasing its grip on the crewman, who crumpled to the ground. "Harry!" I yelled, recognizing the crewman's face twisted in terror. The crew member with the harpoon again attacked the monster. The creature released a guttural shriek. From the corner of my eye, I saw another crew member charging, brandishing a knife, his eyes fixed on the creature. He moved with a kind of desperate fury, slashing at the creature. Their dance was a whirlwind of motion. The creature's inhuman agility against the crew members' raw determination. "Jimmy, shoot it!" the crewman shouted. But the chaos made it difficult, impossible even. I couldn't get a clean shot without risking hitting one of my own. "Get back!" I shouted, but my warning was lost amidst the chaos. The crew member with the harpoon joined the one with the knife. The two crewmen slashed at the creature. For a moment, it seemed like we finally might have the upper hand. But the creature dodged each and every attack. Then it responded with its own, slashing and stabbing at the men with its talons. The men fell back a bit, and that's when it turned its gaze on me. I steadied my grip on the pistol, knowing full well that I would only get one clear shot. But then the two crewmen, brave and desperate, rushed in again, obstructing my aim. "Get back!" I shouted, but I was too late. I tried to aim, but they were too close to the thing. It turned its attention towards them again and attacked ferociously. Like it had the others, it made short work of them. I heard the sickening snap of bone, I saw the flash of blood, and then it was turning towards me again. Its eyes locked onto me. I began to retreat, trying to steady the pistol with my trembling hand. Every step back I took, it mirrored, drawing closer. With adrenaline pumping through my veins, I steeled myself and I aimed. Just as I was about to pull the trigger, it lunged. The speed of its charge was incredible. I got a shot off, but whether it hit its mark, well, I couldn't tell. The next thing I knew, I was slammed backwards. The air was knocked from my lungs, and I felt something stab into my shoulder. Looking back, I saw that I had been driven into a damaged pipe. Through the blinding pain, I looked up and I saw its talon, glistening, raised to deliver the final blow. This was it. The end. But just as it was about to strike, a shrill, otherworldly scream erupted from the alien as it recoiled, lashing out with its tentacles. The guttural scream echoed and reverberated through the room. The creature recoiled in agony, its attention diverted. Through my blurred vision, I saw one of the crewmen, the last one left, knife in hand, standing defiantly behind it. He had managed to wound the creature, but the moment of triumph was fleeting. With a swift, brutal motion, the alien retaliated, its claws sinking deep into the man's chest. I could hear his final scream, a sound of pure agony that would haunt my nightmares forever. But he had provided a momentary distraction. With my last ounce of strength, I raised the pistol again, trying to focus on the creature amidst the flashing emergency lights and the disorientating sway of the ship. Aiming for the creature's head, I squeezed the trigger once, twice, thrice, until the chamber clicked empty. The bullets found their mark. The creature jerked back, dark liquid oozing from its wound. It stumbled, its once agile motions now sluggish. But it wasn't down. Not yet. With a final growl, it lurched towards the exit, disappearing into the ship's dark corridors. I slumped to the floor, gasping for breath, my vision fading. The last thing that I remember was the sounds of the storm outside, indifferent to the horror unfolding within the ship. The flickering lights and the distant, haunting echo of the alien's movements fading away into the ship's corridors. And then, nothing. I awoke with a start, the dim flickering light of the ship playing tricks on my vision. Pain shot through my shoulder, a searing reminder of the encounter with that thing. Every movement was agony, but I had to keep moving. I thought of the crew and the creature. I needed to get to the bridge. I needed to let Mac know what had happened. I needed to see if he was okay. I pushed myself to my feet and made my way through the narrow hallways of the ship. I could still hear the storm outside, the crashing waves, the howling wind. We were still in the heart of it. It seemed to take me forever to make it through the ship. When I finally reached the bridge, I pushed on the door and it creaked open, revealing a sight that I dreaded. Mac lay motionless near the helm. My heart sank. Rushing to his side, I felt for a pulse. It was faint, but there. Relief washed over me momentarily, only to be replaced by a fresh wave of dread. I looked out at the storm through the bridge's windows. Sheets of rain and fierce waves battered the ship. It was a miracle that we were still afloat. Who knew how long the captain had been out? The fact that we hadn't capsized, well, it was a miracle. Pulling myself together, I took the helm. The ship groaned and creaked, but she held. With every ounce of strength left in me, I tried to navigate through the tempest. The storm couldn't last much longer. We would survive. But the alien, where was it? The last encounter left it wounded, perhaps fatally, but I couldn't be sure. Its agility, its sheer power, it wasn't something to underestimate. As the ship rocked, my mind raced. Could we survive this storm? Was the alien truly incapacitated or dead? Would Mac pull through? Would I? All of these questions swirled in my head, but there was one thing that I was certain of. I had to tell our story. If we didn't make it out of this, well, someone had to know. And that's why I'm telling you all of this now. If you can hear this message, know that we faced something beyond our understanding, beyond our world, I think. And remember, there wasn't just one of those lights in the sky. The world needs to know. Whatever comes next, be prepared.